To this day, pray to bless our time together today, that we will be wise as serpents, harmless as doves, and help us to analyze the things that are going on in light of Bible prophecy. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, I could use a lot of prayer today because I spent a lot of hours. I told Pam I slept through my alarm, either forgot to set my alarm this morning or I slept through it. And so I lost at least an hour, to which she kind of started to say, and I said before she said it, which means I only have 3 hours of stuff prepared instead of 5 to talk about. So you know how that goes. But just a heads up, I'm going to be on Hope for Our Times with Tom Hughes tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. Also, Thursday, I think it's at 2 p.m. Eastern, Pastor Kurt Reed from Las Vegas, Harvest Chapel. I apologize, Kurt, if I don't remember the name off the top of my head. It's kind of a crazy week, isn't it? So I titled this Student Protest, Welcome to Say What, is Stan? And I think you'll see some of the crazy things here. So just by way of token. So I'm going to talk a little bit, if I have time, about Psalm 83, because I think some of this stuff is going into play. And in the show notes, I'm going to provide, it'll be later this afternoon when I remember to do it. I'm going to provide show notes to some links or documents that I downloaded from the Be Alert Bible Prophecy in the News Facebook page, which I think does a very good job of tracking everything. And so there's the person who runs that has a view on Psalm 83 that I think is worth looking at. I'm not saying I agree with everything. Again, I take a more open approach to how these things are going to play out. It's amazing to me. I will see I get you would not believe the amount of stuff that I get from people. Maybe you would believe it. And the interesting thing is, look, I appreciate people sending it, and you can send it. I don't have time to analyze it. Sometimes I will respond, and people get upset. Well, I just sent it to you as a favor. You didn't have to Well, I thought I don't know if you want me to respond to you, that you think I need help, and that I'm not quite complete because I haven't come to your viewpoint yet, or maybe you wanted me to critique it. I don't know when you send it to me. So if I'm in the mood to critique it, which I have been known to be at times, I will critique it. So, and like I said, I don't appreciate it, but it's so interesting because there's not much agreement. Excuse me. There's all sorts of disagreement. I mean, it's the timing of the rapture, it's this issue, it's the 70 weeks of Daniel. Is there 70th week? Is there not a 70th week? Is it fully fulfilled? Is it partially fulfilled? I mean, and the arguments get pretty heated. And some people get, to be honest with you, they're a little bit, and I mean, this is a lawyer saying this. People get a little bit high-minded and heavy-handed in the way they argue things. That's coming from a lawyer. And so I just would encourage everybody to, speak the truth in love, but there's the love part that I don't see happens a lot of times, because if you disagree with somebody, boy, you're just the most hateful, awful, terrible person. So I'm going to talk about Psalm 83 a little bit if I have time today. But I will give you links to some. I could link to the Facebook page, but it may not work if you don't belong to that group. So I go to Facebook if you're on Facebook. Follow Be Alert Bible Prophecy in the News. It's a good Facebook group, and there are many others too. But I have downloaded as PDFs some of the posts that were written by the person who does the Facebook Be Alert group, and I don't know if I should identify that person or not. A lot of people know who it is anyway, but and it's not really important. The person is known the person for a long time, and they're intelligent, And so I think you should watch that. So here's some things that I talk about: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. Again, based on this verse in Daniel chapter 12, and I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. So the wicked are going to be ignorant. Okay, so and again, we talk about, you see some of the big themes that are coming together. The world gathering together against Israel. You'll see a clip of the Jordanian foreign minister from a World Economic Forum meeting that took place. And it used to be that these big meetings, World Economic Forum, the Financial Investment Initiative in Saudi Arabia, the World Government Summit, the UN meetings, they used to occur every couple months or 3 months. Now it's like every week there's like 7 of them. And it's a little bit hard for those of us who try to follow this, who believe, that this is what we're supposed to do. It gets very daunting. I talked to, for example, I mentioned Tom Hughes earlier, Brandon Holthouse. I think there's a program coming up with him called Tip of the Spear that I'm on. And it's just hard to keep up. There is so much going on. You feel like if you step away from your computer for a few hours, you've missed a lot. And then that makes it difficult to keep this thing to an hour in 2 minutes like I religiously do, sometimes. So Jerusalem, cup of trembling, Zechariah, a cup of reeling, drunken reeling is what the passage actually says. Talk about this with the seals and how they're going to unfold. And so I think when you layer all of these judgments that are coming in Revelation, I think they start consecutively, but they don't finish. For example, first seal doesn't open, and then everything that happens in the first seal happens, then the second seal opens. I do not think that that's the way that it happens, that the judgments open sequentially, but are concurrent. And I take a little bit different view of the scroll of Revelation, that some people say, well, you don't really know until all 7 seals open. So I found this graphic, and I think it's very good, that the first seal opens and the scroll unrolls partially. Then the second seal, the scroll unrolls partially. And then eventually you get to the 7th, and then you have the whole scroll open, and then you have the trumpets and bowls. And immediately, as soon as I say that, people are going to write and say, oh, no, the trumpets and bowls happen with the opening of, as each seal opens, there's concurrent. I'm not sure I agree with that. So there's, like I said, many views. But as you go over time, I think they open. And before everything happens under the first seal, the white horse, the second seal will open, then the third and fourth seal. And so as you go forward in time, they get more intense. I think that these judgments converge at the second coming of Christ, and that would include the trumpets and the bowl judgments as well. And I like this picture of the bowl, the bowls of wrath being poured out. This is called a mizrach, and I'm pretty sure that I give you my Midwest Hebrew pronunciation. If you can find it, if you want to learn about the typology of the temple and how it relates to Jesus, there's an excellent book out there by a guy named Roger Liebel, L-I-E-B-L. He's Dutch, and it's called A Messiah in the Temple. I used to have a printed copy of it. I don't know where it is. It was the heaviest book I owned. I mean, if you drop this on your foot, you're breaking a toe. But I have a PDF version of it. I think I bought it from Randall Price's ministry many years ago. And it's excellent in learning what all the things mean in the temple service and how they relate to the Messiah. Now, having read that book, I take a little bit different view of this coming temple that's coming in that, listen, I know the Antichrist is going to use it. I know the Antichrist is going to desecrate it. But my point is, if the first and second temples pointed to Messiah, why don't we use the existence of the third temple and what's going to be in it to point to the Messiah also? Yeah. That's my point. Or the pilgrimage road in Israel that's opening up. Perfect example, because what the pilgrims did is they went to the pilgrimage road to go from the Pool of Siloam to the Temple Mount. They sang the Psalms of Ascent. Go read the Psalms of Ascent. Psalms 118 to 130, somewhere in that time frame. It might not start till 120. And I think I did a sermon on that when Jesus was coming into Jerusalem. I think I titled it, Shouting the Right Thing, but at the Wrong Time. These Psalms of Ascent. So again, this is a thing that's being put together, this pilgrimage road, probably going to open next year, if they can get it completed with the war situation and everything. And it will be a perfect opportunity to use that to point people to Mashiach, to this Messiah of Israel. I think it's important. So I understand people will mean it for bad, but we might as well get the symbology, typology, and everything with it. So in this bowl they collected the blood, and then they would pour out the blood later. But what do you notice about this bowl? It has a handle on it, of course, but it has a pointed bottom. And you can go, by the way, this is a picture of the Mizrach that the Temple Institute has built for use in a new temple that they plan on building at some point. But it has a pointed bottom on it. What do you get from that? Well, they can't sit it down until they're done with it. They have to empty it out. And that's a picture, I think, of how the bowls of wrath will happen when they are poured out. The bowl of wrath will be completely emptied before the bowls sit down. So that's how we get that. I wanted to start with this too. But know this is 2 Timothy chapter 3, but know this, in the last days, perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Now, I don't know, maybe Paul wrote that. He had a vision of what's going on in college campuses all over the United States when he wrote that. It's unbelievable, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, a little bit more detail. And you can read the whole passage there in 2 Timothy. So let's dive into this. I want to make a little bit of comment about artificial intelligence. I think it is a big deal. And as soon as I say that, people write to me and say that I'm completely deceived, that it's just garbage in, garbage out, and doesn't mean anything. And I don't know how far they're going to get with it. But I've been watching a lot of people in that space talking about the development of incredible computing power, way beyond the things that you would even think are existence that already exist, but also quantum computing, which is going to really change everything if that comes about. People believe that it will come. People believe it may come very, very soon. But this is an interesting graphic in that AI and AC, fuel power demand. Now, AC does not mean Antichrist in this case. It means air conditioning. One of the great inventions of mankind. I didn't live in a house that had air conditioning till like Pam and I were married for like a year and a half or 2 years. And I'm thinking, like, how did we ever do that? Yeah. But what's happening with these big data centers, and you can see them, they're all over Columbus, other places around the country, around the world, is these have an incredible power demand. That demand is only going to go up. Highly recommend that you follow a guy named Dave Walsh. If Trump gets elected, I would hope that Dave Walsh would be the energy secretary, because he gets it. He knows that, for example, what you need to have good, reliable electricity. How many of you like to have good, reliable electricity? We had storms a while back, and some people in church here were without power. They live around the corner from us. They were without power for like 60 hours. And when that happens, you quickly learn that power is pretty important to your modern day living. Remember when we had that storm they called a derecho? What was that, about 12 years ago now? That thing came through at about 100 miles an hour, and where we lived in Dublin, Ohio at the time, we didn't have power for 4 days. And 2 days was taxing our marriage, okay? The couple across the street had been married about 10 years longer than I. They were like, yeah, we were not getting along. We're living in our basement. It's 100 degrees. There's no air conditioning. We found a hotel room that didn't have power, but they got power back, and I got like 5 minutes after they got power, I logged on, I got the hotel room, and I went over and I turned down the air conditioning, and my goal when I set the air conditioning in the room was to have frost form on the windows because I missed that air conditioning. But you need a continuous base load power system, and the problem is solar doesn't work 80% of the time. Wind doesn't work 70% of the time. So all of these idiots running around, I don't know, I apologize to idiots for making these people, I don't have categories to describe how I really feel about these people running around saying, oh, we just need solar and wind and everything will be okay. And we'll make every car electric, and we'll make, it's insanity. And so the only thing I can figure out is, maybe they don't plan on us being around. That's something, I've had that thought a lot this week. I mean, I know there's these theories out there, the Daigle reports that show a big drop in the UK and United States populations between now and 2025. And maybe they're true. I don't know who put them together. I've heard a lot of different theories about them, but you know, there are other studies out there that studied EMPs, electromagnetic pulse, that would shut down the power grid. And I believe that one of the studies done for the US government determined that if the complete grid went down in the United States, that the population, about 90% of people would die in 6 weeks. Now people say, oh, how can that be? Well, it probably 100 years ago it wouldn't have happened because people didn't have continuous electricity and they learned how to live without it. But now we live in a world where that is true. So that's a big concern among defense industry people. And so this global power demand is coming, and it's just this big demand on the system. So there was a World Economic Forum meeting this week. Larry Fink, he's the, sometimes your name is God-given. He's the head of BlackRock, controls trillions of dollars of assets, big pusher of DEI and that type of thing. And so he was talking a little bit at this meeting about power grids and what happened. So here's just a little clip of that.
For AI, all the new technology that we've developed, probably in entirety, was a domain of startups. And the whole ecosystem was venture capital and the startups. The ecosystem has changed dramatically. AI is a domain of large caps.
Yeah.
And right now, if you look at the S&P 500, 38% of the S&P 500's 10 companies, the largest influence of 10 companies. And if you believe that AI is going to consider to do it, if you solve the numbers that they are using for reinvestment, they may represent 50% one day of, so there's the S&P 10 and the S&P 490. But that is just an example of the power of this is going to be. And I do believe to properly build out AI, we're talking about trillions of dollars of investing. So data centers today could be as much as 200 megahertz. And they're now talking about data centers are going to be 1 gigawatt. That's what powers a city. There was one tech company that I spoke to the CEO last week who said, right now, all their data centers is about 5 gigawatts. By 2030, they need 30 gigawatts. 30. The amount of power that's needed to use AI has huge impact on society.
Yeah.
Where's that power going to come from? Are we going to take it off the grid? What does it mean for elevated energy prices for everybody else if it's that? I think it's going to represent some huge societal questions that we have not addressed, the negative side. Forget about the use of it, but just the generation of it is massive power.
And Dave Walsh will note that what are we doing? We're turning everything to solar and wind. That doesn't work all the time. Like solar, pretty ineffective at night. Oh, well, we'll have batteries. Oh, really? I mean, it takes, I don't know how many million tons, and I'm not exaggerating, million tons to make the batteries in like 1 Tesla. It's an incredible amount of mining that has to go on. And you're going to do this for everybody in the world and raise the living standards? And it's sort of like, doesn't seem to work if there's still the same amount of people around. Now, is that by design or not? That's the question. And given the way that they're doing, by the way, I saw this morning. Let me see if I can, I don't have a slide for it. It was a headline, and this may get this video flagged. So I wonder if I should even do it. I'm gonna, do it anyway. Okay, hang on a second here, because I'll pull it up. Because I just think it's kind of interesting, and maybe I won't even read the headline. I'll just pull it up. So again, I apologize. Not only did I sleep through the alarm, but my wife did too. Yeah, I know. She's just so unreliable in the morning. That's okay. I'm in a big hole, so it doesn't matter. When you're in a hole, stop digging. What's that phrase for? So let me, so I won't read the title, but let me, pull it up. Okay, so this is to this morning's New York Times. Okay, so campuses, Russia, all this stuff. But look at the headline here in the lower left-hand corner and read it. Could this have caused some people harm? That's the New York Times. Eventually, reality catches up to everybody. Right? And I almost fell over when I read it, because I'm thinking like, wow, are they going to get banned? Are they going to have their their cloud accounts, are they going to be debanked? I don't know. Here's another one. This is the heated debate over frozen assets. And so what's the big debate among the G7 and G20, those are the big top 7 and top 20 economic countries, is Russian sanctions. And Russians have hundreds of billions of dollars of assets in banks in these countries. What the Biden administration wants to do is say, okay, we're going to take all of your assets to pay for you, to fund Ukraine, our support of Ukraine. This will completely collapse the international banking system. Only an idiot would be doing this. If you want to be the world's central reserve currency, which the United States dollar is right now, and that's a very good thing for us. If it's not, our life changes dramatically here in the United States. So I'm all for the United States being the reserve currency of the world. But if you do this, that will accelerate the collapse of the dollar as the world reserve currency, taking Russian assets. Because when you're the world reserve currency, that carries with it certain obligations. So we hope to be doing a Proxy Roundtable soon on that particular topic, on economics and banking and that sort of thing. Here's another interesting from the MIT Technology Review. Yes, I geek out and I actually read some of these things. For years, people have said they're taking our data and they're taking our data to try to control us. And the tech companies say, you guys you're crazy. We don't want to do that, right? So that's why they have these massive server farms to store our data, some locally. Sam Altman says helpful agents are poised to become AI's killer function. This is Joe Allen, JoeBot XYZ, saying this. Altman, who is visiting, well, here's what Joe Allen says. It's while the tech companies spent decades pretending they weren't surveilling our every move, then they acted like it didn't matter. And now they're pitching 24/7 inside-out surveillance by personal AI buddy as the hot new product. This is what Sam Altman said. He was visiting Cambridge for a series of events hosted by Harvard and the venture capital firm X Fund, described the killer app for AI. It's kind of interesting that he used the term killer app for AI as a super competent colleague that knows absolutely everything about my whole life, every email, every conversation I've ever had, but doesn't feel like an extension. It could tackle some task instantly, he said, and for more complex ones, it could go off and make an attempt, but come back with questions for you if it needs to. What does this sound like in a Christian context? It sounds like somebody who wants to be God. I mean, this is Tower of Babel type stuff. This is interesting from Front Page, Daniel Greenfield, excellent writer. You should read everything he writes. He's a very good thinker, Orthodox Jewish man. Democratic judge claims conservative lawyer is a threat to the public for representing conservatives. So what happened here is John Eastman, who represented the president in connection with the 2020 election, he made claims under an act. One of the claims he made was under a thing called the Electoral Vote Count Act. I may have mentioned this before. The Electoral Vote Count Act was, to put it mildly, very ambiguous in the way that it was written. It could be interpreted a certain way, and so Eastman and other lawyers interpreted the act in a way to support their client. It sounds like what lawyers do every day. But because they didn't like Trump, it created a narrative. They later went in a bill, spending bill, and amended that act to say something else. But Eastman was operating under the act that existed at that time. They amended the bill and said, well, you can't say that because the bill says this, but it didn't say that at the time, you understand. He's allowed to rely on that statute. He was brought up on the charges to be disbarred in California, and they disbarred him, and now he's appealing it, but they won't let him have his law license back because he's a threat to the public. And I can hear one lawyer in the audience saying, wow, and that is exactly right, wow. And they're doing this. Now, there was a big article in Time magazine this week, and when you see Time magazine and the New York Times, they start writing articles like this, they're sort of thinking that maybe Trump might win the election. And this isn't about, how do I say this in a nice way? There are things that he does that I just absolutely detest. There are things he does that I actually like. And by the way, if Biden ever did something that I liked, I would say, talk about it. To date, I'm not aware of any. So it's not about supporting Trump. The point with Trump is, a lot of people, you may have noticed, a lot of people do not like him. But they are abusing the legal system in a way that I have never seen in my life. It's called lawfare. This case in New York City is the most, they can't even articulate what he did to violate a law. It's insane. But it doesn't matter, because why? Well, he's tied up in a courtroom for the next 5 or 6 weeks and he can't go out and campaign. The funny thing is, he's on the road less, so his poll numbers keep going up. So I remind you that, about the war story, I had to destroy the village in order to save it. And they're kind of coming back on them in a way that they did not think. So the Supreme Court has a case in front of it that presidents have immunity for the acts when they are in office. I saw a picture this morning. It was a situation room, and in the situation room were all of the important national security people: Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, Vice President Joe Biden, and President Barack Obama, watching on the screen as what? The operation took place to take out Osama bin Laden. President Obama should have immunity for those acts, whether you like it or not. I think that that's a good principle, because we don't live in Venezuela or, well, now Brazil, where they prosecute the past leader for things that they don't like. They just sort of make it up. And I know it's happening in Brazil. I have a lot of pretty, I wouldn't say inside information, but I have a lot of information about what's been going on down there with President Bolsonaro and this leftist lunatic that replaced him in an election last year. Bolsonaro's now had at least last I heard, his passport had been taken away, so he couldn't leave the country. People who supported him have had the same thing done. Just like here in the United States, people are in prison, in jail, held without bail. And it's been 3.5 years, some of them have been in prison waiting trial. It's to send a message. It's like prosecuting the people who prayed in an abortion clinic. They prosecute them, not the people literally tearing down parts of cities and universities and institutions. They don't prosecute them. They prosecute the other people to send a message. So it's like an 87-year-old grandmother who's waiting sentencing and could be sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for praying in a hallway outside an abortion clinic. And by the way, what's the response of some of the people on the supposedly pro-life right in the United States? They're backpedaling away from those people as fast as they can over this Arizona thing and the Roe versus Wade overturning. And it's kind of this, I personally think it's very disgusting to watch. So they want to do this, the Supreme Court's hearing a case that would affirm that presidents, whether it's Trump or Obama or anybody else, have immunity for their official acts that they perform while they're in office. And it would probably cause a lot of these cases against Trump to be dismissed, or large portions of those cases to be dismissed. So that decision should come down by the end of June. This is an interesting story from, I saw it a number of places, the Independent: dinner party conversation turns morbid. Chat about the apocalypse is becoming more mainstream. And you get a lot. So these professors, they did this thing published at Study Finds. The end of the world is becoming normal conversation. Welcome to FBC. So we'll give the study finds and the independent our guest prophecy updaters this week. But one of the things they note, they've looked at all the mainstream publications. I mean, they're not looking at, Front Page Magazine or some conservative newspapers. They're looking at New York Times, Washington Post, and they're finding that discussion about apocalypse and end times is really becoming very, very popular. That's interesting. But then they also make the note that a survey in 2022 by the Pew Research Center revealed that almost 1 in 10 U.S. adults believe that humanity is living in the end times. However, the survey also notes that 58% did not hold that belief, and that Americans without college degrees are more likely than college graduates to believe humanity is approaching its end. Okay, that may be true. Why? Because you go to college now, there's a dumbing down process that takes place. You don't come out of, can you imagine paying $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 to send your kid to these schools, and they're canceling commencement, they're canceling classes, you can't get the class? I think there's huge lawsuits coming against these colleges and universities, and I hope they win. The people that sue these places win every single one of them. And I'm all for free speech, but free speech doesn't mean you get to trespass and block and assault and that type of thing. So here's the thing on the protests. College hate by George. Now, immediately you say this, you'll get accused of being anti-Semitic. And this is not anti-Semitic, you're just stating facts, that a lot of these organizations are funded by and this is where I got the title today, Say What to Stand. Say what is stand? Based on what's going on there. So these are all these campus protesters, and they're finding out a lot of these people are paid. One campus, they found that 90% of the people protesting on campus didn't even go there. They've blocked off places. But then the interesting thing is, have you seen pictures of their tent cities? Every tent is the same color. How many of you go to any campground around, how many times would you go to a campground and find every tent is the same color? Probably doesn't happen, except on colleges campuses in the United States. And here they have catered food service. And you're seeing all these articles about, these wonderful people. This is from the New York Times this morning. Meet Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, veteran political operative. And down here it says on the bottom, 3 terms in, the progressive lawmaker is earning a reputation as a builder of bridges. Excuse me. And so they're finding that this Wall Street Journal, students sought training before protest. Fox News and some other publications came out with a list of demands made by the protesters at UCLA. We need these things. And so this is really is where you get to say what is stand. Fox News obtained a Google Doc with a list of needs: vegan and gluten-free food, super bright flashlights with strobe. Do you see how they use these things to blind people? Yeah. Rope and zip ties. You had peaceful protesting, right? Helmets, shields, and wood. Lotion, no sunscreen. Knee and elbow pads. And this happened at UCLA. The anti-Israel protests hunkered down on grounds at the University of California, put out a bizarre list of requested donations Wednesday with some urgent items that seemingly indicate the mob is preparing for battle. Skater helmets, shields, wood for barriers, and elbow and knee pads were among the much-needed tools put out by the Students for Justice in Palestine, a group funded by Open Society Foundation and other left-wing NGOs that are funded in large part by the Soros family. It's a fact. So here's their needs. Look at some of these things. please ensure that the donations are BDS compliant. And it says here the Boy Cat app can help with this. So you can see these are probably graduate students because now they've lost the ability to spell. And look at we headlamps, super bright flashlights, organizational bins, hot food for lunch, important. Vegan, gluten-free, no bagels. Somebody said, well, we ought to send them a whole bunch of lox of bagels. And by the way, this is Alexander Soros. He is the son and now the person in charge of Soros donations, and he has made the statement, I'm more political than my father ever was. That ought to frighten you. So he's dating, got a new squeeze, and here he is with his squeeze. You may recognize her as still married to former Congressman Anthony Weiner, Houman Abedin, whose parents are Muslim Brotherhood publishers from Saudi Arabia. She herself was the chairperson of the Hillary Clinton campaign for president in 2016. And so they're going to the Met Gala. They're making their red carpet debut together. Now, this is something I think we should all get behind. An Iranian university has offered scholarships to students who are expelled by U.S. universities, and a lot of them are being expelled. I think Ilhan Omar's daughter was expelled from Columbia. So let's start a GoFundMe to help these people get to Iran to go to university.
Yes.
Right? I think I might even be in on that a little bit. And they can go to the Iranian university and they can start their Queers for Palestine student group there. I would encourage it. It's a way to solve problems. Greenberg Traurig, a big law firm, filed this lawsuit in Virginia. So I'm going to give Greenberg Traurig, I've worked with them on some cases over the years. Big law firm. Big, powerful law firm. They filed a lawsuit against AJP Educational Foundation, also known as American Muslims for Palestine and National Students for Justice in Palestine, on behalf of a number of plaintiffs that were damaged, injured by them. And I say, go for it, Greenberg Traurig, and I hope you win. And I hope you bankrupt these people, and I hope you give the lawfare to them that they're doing to everybody on the right. It's payback. That's my opinion. Okay. Well, you should know this. This is, just so you know about this threat of Iranian missiles, is not just Israel. Okay, you can see Israel there, but they can reach all the way to Europe, Eastern Europe, with these missile ranges that they have. Interesting sidebar is this Iranian attack on Israel gave baby Kim in North Korea a look at how the West missile defenses operate. So Iran may have sent these missiles and drones over just to find out, okay, how is Israel going to respond? I'll talk a little bit, play you a clip about that a little bit later. This was the first Turkish martyr of Al-Aqsa storm. Tried to stab somebody in the old city and was, as they say in Israel, neutralized. But in the Tehran Times, he's a martyr. Tried to kill somebody, tried to kill a policeman or a soldier in the old city in Jerusalem. Oh, this is kind of interesting. This would fit into the most ironic statement of 2024 so far. This is in the Tehran Times also. Excessive violence against protesters will never work, says the Iranian parliament. That's the whole modus operandi of the Iranian government against its people. The other, so this, I'm going to kind of just go through this stuff very quickly as I can. The Hague Court, International Criminal Court, has threatened to issue arrest warrants for the leaders of Israel, including Netanyahu, Gantz, Gallant, and others. If they do issue these warrants, it'll be almost impossible for these people to travel internationally, unless they, let's say they're going to go to Belgium, and Belgium would follow along with the International Criminal Court warrant. They would have to have a rock-solid agreement with the government before they ever set foot in that country, because they could go to that country, get arrested, and never come back. So here's Netanyahu's response to that. Here we go.
You have to hear this to believe this. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is contemplating issuing arrest warrants against senior Israeli government and military officials as war criminals. This would be an outrage of historic proportions. International bodies like the ICC arose in the wake of the Holocaust committed against the Jewish people. They were set up to prevent such horrors, to prevent future genocides. Yet now, the International Court is trying to put Israel in the dock. It's trying to put us in the dock as we defend ourselves against genocidal terrorists and regimes, Iran of course, that openly works to destroy the one and only Jewish state. And in targeting Israel, the ICC would be targeting all democracies, because it would be undermining their inherent right to defend themselves against savage terrorism and wanton aggression. Israel expects the leaders of the free world to stand firmly against the ICC outrageous assault on Israel's inherent right of self-defense. We expect them to use all the means at their disposal to stop this dangerous move. 6 months after the terrible Hamas massacre of October 7th, 80 years after the horrors of the Holocaust, the Jewish state calls on decent people everywhere to reject this outrage by the ICC, to stand with Israel as we fight the barbarians of Hamas and Iran, and as we work to secure a more peaceful world.
And of course, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, responded to this. This prosecutor, by the way, this prosecutor, it's a bunch of political maneuvering. They're left-wing, they hate Israel. And the prosecutor came out that's doing this, I think his name is Khan, and he said, Israel, they were criticizing us. They shouldn't engage in such intimidation tactics. Crazy. Some big news here. Turkey has now come out saying that they back the international possible warrant against Netanyahu. I will talk about this in just a moment. And you'll see this as I talk about this potential peace deal. It's kind of interesting, the time frame that they use. Like, well, they want to make this peace agreement with Israel, and they're saying, well, maybe 5 years. The agreement will need to be effective for 5 years, or maybe 10 years, or maybe 7 years, right? That's possible. I mean, I'm just saying is that they're actually talking about it. This is an important article I think you should read at Center for Strategic and International Studies, The Coming Conflict with Hezbollah. And you'll see this, and I've got a clip coming up here that I'm going to play in just the next slide. So the CSIS article goes through this, and it references UN Resolution 1701, which which says that there should be no military installations, things that could be used for military things, in this region south of the Litani River to the Israeli border. So you can see where the Litani River is. Tyre Sidon's a little bit north of that. This is, 15, 20 miles into Israel. But you can see over here in Metula, it's only a few miles away from Metula. And Kiryat Shimona, and all those cities along there are empty. 80, 100,000 people have evacuated. They live in hotels in Israel at the expense of the Israeli government. It's a little bit expensive. And it's an intolerable situation. So as this article says, Litani must serve as Israel's new border in the north. Hezbollah will only be deterred when it has suffered the loss of territory with little hope of reclaiming it. So there was an interview, and I don't remember the name of the lady. I posted on my Facebook page. She used to be in the IDF, very, very intelligent, and she was interviewed. So here's a few minutes, because she's talking about what happens if there's a war in the north. This is from about 2 weeks ago. It's excellent analysis. So this is about 45 minutes into the interview, so watch this.
For them at all, Hezbollah very much calls for our destruction. And I think that in that sense, it is echoing the Islamic revolution of Iran much more than the country called Lebanon.
Sorry, when you say calling for Israel's destruction, you mean Hezbollah's statements are not about liberating the Sheba farms, the little land dispute there is in the north, or about standing up for the plucky little Gazans in Gaza against Israel. It's about the destruction of the state of Israel. As simple as that?
It's not just as simple as that. Go into their website or not, El Manar. You may be followed afterwards by all sorts of different intelligence.
Okay.
El Manar.
Okay, I
It's in
will
English.
stay away from Hezbollah.com.
Hey, I go into it all the time. It's El Manar. It is their official website. And they have it there as an infograph, Elon, and it says, the aim is the destruction of the Zionist entity. That would be us. States very clearly.
So let's have a look then about what will happen if an all-out war erupts, or rather not erupts, if the low-grade war that is happening now that has seen so many internally displaced people on Israel's side spirals into a full-scale war. What sort of scenario are we looking at?
We're looking at thousands of rockets and UAVs and suicide drones a day, pretty much for a week or two. After that, it has to drop off, just because it's not that we're sitting here like sitting ducks, meaning we, in the meantime, in Israel, are both defending by intercepting those incomings. That's a lot of different types of projectiles.
How many of those do you think are going to be intercepted? How many are going to get through?
90 to 95% will be intercepted.
But how
It's all
many
about
do you expect
statistics.
they'll be firing a day?
I think that they will be firing such a degree that 50 to 100 a day will get through. That's a lot.
So you think they're going to be firing 1,000 rockets at Israel a day?
I think that they're going to be firing more in the first week or two. After that, it'll go down. Again, similar to Hamas, they'll use it because they want to make sure that they have all the way to the end. They have to show that they can keep on firing.
And the pattern will be indiscriminate fire at Israeli cities, trying to specifically target critical infrastructure. What do we think Hezbollah's strategy is?
They want to do the critical infrastructure because they want to show that they are doing warfare. And they will be attacking all of Israel because they don't do warfare. They're a terror organization. I mean, they're going to say they're doing it against the military. They will try to target the military because they understand that the military very much threatens them. We also understand that. So here it comes into the defense, and I'm posing it as a question for all of us right now. We think of Iron Dome as an idea, okay, because we have a lot of different types there. Where should Iron Dome be? Should it be defending you and me as citizens, or should it be defending the military bases? Just think of the moral dilemma there, because if it isn't defending the military bases, we won't have the military to defend us. But if it's defending the military bases, it's not going to be defending all of the citizens of Israel. We don't have that kind of hermetic shield.
And what about this iron beam technology that's been tested using a laser at a fraction of the cost of Iron Dome interceptors to blow rockets out of the sky? Could that be in place in time for a war with Hezbollah?
I don't think so. Not if it's going to take place right now. Having said that, I always wonder at what stage you use something, meaning that they've already shown operational idea, meaning it is something that will be deployed, but I don't know to tell you if that's this year or next year or another 10 years. It's a question.
Let's put this on the table. Third Lebanon War, how catastrophic would this be? How many casualties should we expect to see? How many buildings, iconic buildings, can we expect to be destroyed by Iranian-made missiles?
At the institute that I now have the honor to be the director of, they did a kind of scenario like this in the last 3 years. And the numbers that we arrived at won't make anybody happy. We're talking about between, wow, everybody's going to be uncomfortable right now, okay? 200 to 500 casualties a day for the first week.
200 to 500 casualties a day for the first week.
Yeah, afterwards it goes down. I know, nobody wants to talk about that because we're talking, if I say that 50 to 100 get through, I can't assess in that sense if it's going to be the ones that will specifically have the heavy payload. That's a lot of, again, it's about both destruction and about death. And that's one of the aspects of how prepared are we. I think that a lot of systems in Israel are way more prepared now than they were 6 months ago. The health system for sure, but not just the health system. I think one of the good things that's happened inside Israel in these 6 months of the war against Hamas, not against the Gaza Strip, against Hamas and the Gaza Strip, has been the preparation of local authorities who understand that there probably won't be electricity. When you don't have electricity, that means you don't have pumping water. You don't. It isn't just the refrigerator per se. Okay, it's not just your phone.
It's not just no Wi-Fi.
Okay, that's also part of it because it means you don't know what's happening. We're not at that stage yet, but that's part of those day-to-day preparations. And as I say to people, be prepared at a low level. One of the things that will happen is I think that the electricity, and here we're already talking that the electrical authorities in Israel, we have a lot of alternatives. So they'll attack one, you go to the other. But you have to be aware of the fact that that's going to be part of what happens, and we're not used to that here. That has not happened here. There's a whole aspect that has to do with cyber warfare that the Iranians could bring in. And again, for me, any full scale against Hezbollah means the Iranians are in. That Islamic regime, the cyber capabilities sit more in Iran.
So that goes on for quite a while. That's about an hour interview, and I'll put a link sometime today in the show notes so you can find that. I highly recommend that you listen to it. She's very knowledgeable. She works for the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University. I think that's where it's located. Very intelligent, very good analyst. She was in the IDF and government for many, many years, over a quarter of a century. And she knows what she's talking about. So she's talking about this area. Understand that the Israeli cities, there have been hundreds and hundreds of buildings damaged and destroyed. In the city of Metula, there's whole blocks that have been flattened by attacks by Hezbollah since October 7th. You hardly hear anything about it. All those people have left. So the estimates that her institute did over the past few years and sort of their wargaming of this may have been based on the fact that these cities would be occupied when this thing cut loose. Now they're not occupied. Kiryat Shimona, you see here at the bottom of the screen there, that's 25,000 people. We've been through there. I mean, they've got like Walmart's type, stores and that type of thing. That's where I couldn't figure out how to use the Hebrew language self-serve gasoline pumps. And Pam said, why don't you go ask? I mean, can you imagine? She said, why don't you go inside and ask somebody? But, well, I went to Nahariya till we had friends because I figured they would know how to use them. And then we had a discussion about whether I had enough gas to get all the way from Kiryat Shimona to the coast. But anyway, and I did. But, so this area here, but in southern Lebanon, there's 120,000 people who have left their homes, and there's thousands of buildings have been flattened and destroyed by Israel since October 7th. And you just don't even hear about it. But this could turn into a big war. Now, one of the areas of dispute is this area called Sheba Farms. And it's not a farm. It's part of the Golan Heights. It's what Amos Hochstein, or whatever you call him, is running around Lebanon trying to get Israel to give up. And it's an important area. What's in Sheba Farms? Well, here's a picture of Sheba Farms. This is Tel Dan. If you go to Tel Dan, this is the altar part of Tel Dan on the north, and right below that, at the bottom of that hill there on the other side of the trench, it was dug by the IDF in 1967 war. That was the Syrian border in 1967. Israel took this area back all the way up. So that area that you see, that's Sheba Farms. It's a very strategic, important part of the defense of Israel against Syria, and now an area, can you imagine Lebanese Hezbollah militias occupying that area? Oh, we're going to go to Tel Dan to visit today. Now, you would go there, and most times it's closed right now, but you go there because Hezbollah's over the mountain. But imagine that they're there. Here's another picture of it. So right at the bottom of the hill, there's a fence. That was the Syrian border. Israel came in. By the way, archaeological, very important site, talked about it many times. Israel, before the military dug the trench, they brought in archaeologists to say, is it okay for us to dig a trench here? Because they're very sensitive to that. Because why? Because the history of what's buried there is very important to the argument that Israel has a right to exist there. This is where the altar was that Jeroboam erected, and the golden calf would have been up here on that area. You can go there and look at all of that. There's this is the gate area. The altar part is up there towards the north. But this is Sheba Farms. That's Sheba Farms there. That's what people say. And then you see the white buildings up there. That's Gajar. It's a Lebanese village. And they wanted to be part of Israel. Wait a minute. They're Arabs. Yeah, they wanted to be part of Israel because they don't like living under Lebanese government, Shia, Hezbollah controlled, or Syria. So that's a big deal. So this is an article I would highly recommend. It's by Cohen at Tablet Magazine, called The Last Lebanon War. And his point is, listen, we've had 2 Lebanon wars. We're going to have another one, and we need to make sure that this is the last one. We can have a 3rd Lebanon war, but there shouldn't be a 4th. We should deal with the problem. But this ties into what's going on in Gaza, because they haven't got everything finished in Gaza. Houthis are now attacking again in the Red Sea. This is a great report from Alma. Highly recommend that you follow Alma. Israel-alma.org. Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. There was a ship that was there off the coast of Yemen, and that ship left. And what happened when that ship left? It was an Iranian, quote, cargo ship, and it was providing coordinates. Now that's dropped off, but now they're starting to pick back up again, and they're threatening to do more. Here is a little clip. Oh, this is an interesting article in the Jerusalem Post the other day. UN rebuilding homes in Gaza may take 80 years. I would say that Gaza is not going to be rebuilt in our lifetime. Let's put it this way. In our lifetime, in the current form that we're in, I don't think it'll happen. You can figure that out. What I mean, and if you look at the destruction, remember one of the reasons that Russia went into Syria to help them was Russia anticipated getting the contracts to rebuild large portions of Syria that have been destroyed by Syrian and Russian bombing, to get rid of the Shia, the Sunni Muslims. You know, get them to Europe, make them somebody else's problem. By the way, has that worked? The young blonde conservative Ava, and then she's got a Dutch name that begins with VLAAD something. And I would fracture it if I try to say it. She gave a good speech this week in Hungary about what's happening with immigration in Europe. Do you think that maybe some of that immigration is going to happen, some of the things that she said were bad are going to happen here in the United States, given what's happening? I'm sure that none of those people who are sitting at UCLA demanding zip ties, strobe, helmets, and that type of thing, I'm sure they will respect our laws and not vote since they're not citizens. There's a reason why all of this stuff is happening. It's crazy. Here's a Hamas official, and he says, we would lay down our arms if an independent Palestinian state is established. Here's his interview in Istanbul. In an interview Wednesday, he said that Hamas would disarm
وهو يقول ذلك
appeared to be a
لم ينهي
significant
أكثر من 20%
concession
من قدراتها لا
by the
البشرية
militant group
ولا
officially committed to Israel's
المدنية.
destruction, but it's
ولم ينهي.
unlikely Israel
ما الحل؟
would consider such a scenario. It is vowed to crush Hamas.
إنشاء
But he says in here, well, listen, we would be willing to back off for 5 years
التي نشأت بهذا الصدد. ونعم.
if we had a peace agreement. They're saying the West will cost $40 billion. This was part of that article that I had about the apocalypse. This was an image that they used. Oh, by the way, this is an AI-generated picture of the horsemen of the apocalypse that they accompanied that article with. But I think it only has 3, right? It only looks like 3, but there are 4. So we can't give the AI generator here any kind of guessed updater because it's just flat out wrong. They didn't get it right. So this is a big story. This is at Ynet. Israel officials examine joint control of Gaza with Arab states post-war. A report says, listen, according to the plan, Israel is to share control with the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia alongside the United States, and it will allow for continued IDF operations inside Gaza. The New York Times reported Friday that senior officials in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office are exploring a post-war plan in which Israel would share control of the Gaza Strip with these countries alongside the United States. And this sounds very much, and I don't have time to get into it, go read Psalm 83, go read the links that I'll provide later, the documents that I'll provide later today, and see how they relate together. And I think this is a very significant thing that we see happening. And Blinken's running around the Middle East trying to effectuate a peace agreement. Biden's talking about it, or at least it appears that Biden's trying to talk about it. So here's Tom Friedman. Tom Friedman is, and I don't respect Tom Friedman. I only bring him up because there's a Israeli journalist named Barak Ravid, and Friedman and Ravid seem to have an inside track to what the Biden administration is thinking. So that's why I think it's important to see what you say. So now Friedman has this column that he's put out. It's in today's New York Times. Israel and Saudi Arabia are trading places. It used to be Saudi Arabia was the pariah state. Now everybody loves Saudi Arabia and Israel's the pariah state. And I think it's an interesting juxtaposition. I think he's correct that he is noting it. So here is Friedman talking to the Saudi foreign minister at a World Economic Forum meeting on the Middle East this past Monday.
To get some kind of stable resolution of the crisis in Gaza, what do the Arab states need to be doing? What does the United States need to be doing? What do the Israelis need to be doing? What do the Palestinians need to be doing? Because it's going to take some kind of concerted effort between all 4 to get us to some kind of stable new place. And Foreign Minister Farhan, would you lead us off as our host?
Well, thank you, Tom. I think the first thing we need is a ceasefire, obviously. We need to end the suffering of the people of Gaza in order to be able to focus on what comes next. There is now discussion of potentially reaching a ceasefire through the hostage negotiations. That would be very, very positive. And of course, we support the release of all hostages. But it's absolutely necessary that any ceasefire be permanent, not temporary. And on that basis, we can start then working on what comes next. And obviously, without a real political pathway, not just for Gaza, but for Palestine as a whole, it'll be very difficult for Arab countries to discuss how we are going to govern Gaza, especially in the context of the immense destruction that has already befallen there.
Okay, and I'll just sort of summarize the rest of what he had to say. It was sort of blah, blah, blah. Israel's problem, blah, blah, blah. Israel's a problem, blah, blah, blah. Netanyahu. Here's the Jordanian foreign minister, interesting, at the same meeting in Riyadh. Here's what he had to say.
Echo what my friend has just said. I mean, we've got the urgent, the immediate, and we've got the longer term. The urgent, the immediate, is to stop the aggression in Gaza, to stop the killing, to stop the destruction of the whole community, 0.3 million people who've been bombed out of any kind of semblance of life, and then to move forward on a path that will ensure that none of us in the region will have to live the horrors, not just of the killing of Israeli civilians on October 7, but also the killing of 34,000 Palestinians since October 7. I think that is the priority. Obviously, we have the humanitarian catastrophe which we have to face. That catastrophe is deepening. Children are dying from hunger and starvation. But going forward, I think we need to have that transformative move, Tom. We cannot go back to the modus operandi pre-October 7, where everybody's paying lip service to the longer solution and nobody's doing anything that is realistic, that is will achieve that peace, the two-state solution. Why are we not having the two-state solution? Because we have an Israeli government that says no to the two-state solution. We in the Arab world are offering, again, we have a goal, we're offering a plan, we're ready to engage with all our partners to make sure that we go to that end game, which will bring peace and security to Palestinian Israelis. But the one question that I would ask, and I'd like you to ask, is if we come up with the best plan ever, and all of us in the international community agree that this is the plan to go forward, and then Netanyahu and his government say no, what happens then? Will he face consequences? Because if he does not, he's going to continue with more of the same. So I think we really have to call a spade and say the party that is responsible for denying Palestinians, Israelis, the whole region peace must be held accountable, and all of us must come together to prevent it from dooming the future to conflict. And this is the quintessential question that we have not yet seen any answer to. And if we don't answer that, I think we'll be moving in the same cycle, and that would be an environment conducive to more violence, more conflict. And the amount of dehumanization and hatred that has come out of this latest round of confrontation, of the aggression on Gaza and all, is beyond description. And I think one challenge we all need to think about is how do we navigate around that once the
So they blame Netanyahu for everything. Turkey's now come out and said, we're going to stop all trade with Israel. And Turkey's been criticized heavily by the pro-Palestinian group. And so Erdogan came out this week and said, okay, we're going to stop all trade with Israel. Erdogan said Netanyahu's actions show that he has no conscience. All Western countries led by the U.S. support Israel. We couldn't stay silent while Palestinians die under Israeli bombs. We've cut all trade with Israel worth around $9.5 billion. So that's where Erdogan is coming from. And they're blaming that, and there's this push to get rid of Netanyahu by everybody. And whether you like Netanyahu or not, this is an international push. By the way, you saw the Jordanian foreign minister. This was an editorial cartoon in the Jordanian newspaper Al Ghad the other day. You see that? You see the imagery there? Netanyahu's fiddling, but he's using a saw on the peace dove. For months, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been avoided detailed public discussion about Gaza's post-war future. And this is a problem. And this push for peace, this has been going on for a while. The Al-Akhbar newspaper, a Hezbollah mouthpiece in Lebanon, published a list of what Israel would accept. But go back to 2019, and the person who runs Be Alert reminded me of this. This was a peace to prosperity, and just the terminology used, this was run by a guy from the United States government, the economic plan, programs and projects to rebuild the Palestinians, to build a Palestinian state. There's about 120-page document, 175 projects specific projects identified. The goal is to empower the Palestinian people to build a better future for themselves and their children. The vision is founded on three tenets: unleashing economic potential, empowering the Palestinian people, and enhancing Palestinian governance. Does this sound very familiar to what's been touted by the Biden administration recently? Executive summary: peace to prosperity is a vision to empower the Palestinian people. And they had a big workshop in Bahrain, and here's a clip of two guys talking on stage, and the sound will start here in just a minute, guys. This is Tony Blair and Jared Kushner. And by the way, it's interesting that Tony Blair talks about, well, you know, one of the projects was Serbia. That was such a great thing we did in Serbia. Go ahead.
And if you think about it, it's of the essence that the Jewish state of Israel and the predominantly Muslim Palestine can live together. And that will only happen if there is that deep cultural acceptance alongside all the different bits of the negotiation and politics.
Well, you talk about Bahrain's prosperity and the job that they've done here to develop the economy and to diversify, and we've heard a lot about that from the different ministers over the last couple of days, but the polar opposite of that is what's happening in Gaza, where you really do have a leadership vacuum. You've got a government that is in place there that is more focused on the destruction of their neighbor than they are on the well-being of their own citizens. A question I get asked a lot, which I'm happy to be asking to somebody else for a change, is that, you know, we have a blocked reconciliation process where it seems that you have the split governance and you have a fairly recalcitrant Hamas. What do you see happening in Gaza, and what do you think the prioritization is of that government after so many years of underperforming and backwards steps?
So one of the things I'm pleased about with the plan is that you do focus a lot on Gaza. I think what happens in Gaza is a tragedy. I would like to see, before we get a long-term solution, I would like to see at least a short-term agreement where the violence can be halted, some stability is achieved, we get the reconstruction necessary going into Gaza, and then...
Well, that conference led to this being released less than a year later in early January 2020, Peace to Prosperity, a vision to improve the lives of the Palestinian and Israeli people. This was the Trump plan. Jared Kushner's vision for peace. This is Friedman's article in today's New York Times. Try to get a copy of that. I'll try to put a link to the show notes, but it might be behind a paywall. And so what you see, this is the Arab news from Saudi Arabia today talking about fading of the Oslo dream. I don't think things will change until the King Solomon passes away. That's my opinion. Here's the new Time cover coming out. Big interview with Trump, and he says, I think peace, two-state solution will be very difficult now. Even though his plan back in 2020 was for a two-state solution. So I don't know. This is the Middle East. These are the countries, try to put on there the countries identified in Ezekiel 38, where they're located. And by the way, if you have a different opinion, you don't need to send me your view, because I know there's a whole bunch of different opinions. And we'll see how this comes together. I think it'll come together in the near future. This is kind of interesting, though. This is from Gatestone Institute this morning. Iran's new terror proxy, Sudan. And that's interesting because now we've had Russia playing around Sudan. Now we have Iran. Clearly Persia's involved in the Ezekiel 38 thing. Russia might be involved, Magog, maybe the Central Asian Islamic republics. So this, you can go to Psalm 83 and you can read about that. I'll talk more about that in the future. I'm going to read this little post by Seth Frantzman today from the Jewish Chronicle in the UK. The days of outsourcing Gaza to Hamas are over. And I think Seth is right. I mean, I follow Seth, and he's been very, very frustrated by what's going on in Israel. with regard to Gaza. Now is the time when 2 decades of outsourcing Gaza to Hamas can end once and for all. This will take visionary leadership from Israel, Western countries, and regional partners such as the Abraham Accords peace partners of Israel in the Gulf. Hamas's rule has been a terrible sentence inflicted on Gaza. It has led to the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It continues to hold 133 hostages. Nobody knows how many of them are alive, by the way. However, many UN organizations, international organizations, and countries refuse to condemn its crimes or imagine a Gaza without Hamas. There must be a better way forward. If more than 6 months of war has taught us anything, it is that this organization continues to cling to power and use Gaza to attack Israel and sow war throughout the region. It's time to learn the lessons of 2 decades of failed policy and end the folly of outsourcing Gaza to Hamas. Seth is exactly right. Let me finish up with this, by the way, for International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which I think is tomorrow. I believe that Israel is going to make available videos of interviews of people who were held hostage. I would highly recommend that you watch them. Sheryl Sandberg, who used to be executive at Facebook, she has a video that's out about the sexual crimes committed by Hamas on October the 7th. And this is in response, one of these lecturers in one of these universities says, it's funny in fake news to claim Hamas carried out sex crimes. Now, this is the last thing I'm going to do today. It's going to take a few minutes. This is H.R. 6090. It's an act, and you see what it says here. Passed the House this week. It's going to the Senate. I think there were about 72 people that voted against it, including some Jewish congressmen like Gerald Nadler from New York, a Democrat, voted against it, to provide for the consideration of a definition of anti-Semitism set forth by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance for the enforcement of federal anti-discrimination laws concerning education, programs, or activities, and for other purposes. And so you can download the act. It's not very long. It's only a few pages long. It's so I have some issues with it. I think it's probably unconstitutional on its face. It does restrict speech. It incorporates the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition of anti-Semitism. It also incorporates, I think it says here, it means the definition of anti-Semitism adopted on May 26, 2016. And look, this is perfectly fine. If Congress wants to define anti-Semitism this way, they can do this. But, you know, they don't, it seems to be more show than anything else to me. And there's a lot of people on the right, oh, this is going to prevent us from sharing the gospel because it says it includes the contemporary examples of anti-Semitism identified in the IHRA definition. And it does. One of the examples of this is saying that the Jews killed Jesus. You're not allowed to do that. So a lot of people are running around, oh, we're going to be put in jail if we share the gospel. Folks, listen, there is not a single penalty in the statute. It is enabling, Congress has enabled federal bureaucrats to implement the law. Now, you need to understand that there is currently in front of the Supreme Court, and may be a decision between now and the end of June when the Supreme Court term ends, a case that may render laws like this ineffective. So there's been some cases in the Supreme Court where the subject has come up. So I'm going to use the example, and I don't know if this is specifically in front of the Supreme Court or not. The EPA will define, the navigable waters of the United States. The Congress didn't really define it. They left it up to the EPA, and the EPA does it. And so there's this guy in Idaho or someplace who has a drainage ditch or a irrigation ditch along his property, and he's tried to clean it up, and they're fining him $37,000 or $67,000 a day for cleaning up that ditch on his property. And they're saying that ditch contains navigable waters of the United States. Like somebody's going to put a boat in this it's insanity. And the Supreme Court has cases in front of it to say Congress has the ability to make laws. The executive branch has the ability to enforce laws enacted by Congress. This seems to be a very simple thing to determine. But this is not the way the government's been running for the last 50 or 60 years. The bureaucracy is making laws. Go look at the Federal Register. When I started in law school, the Federal Register occupied 10 shelves in the library at the law school. Now it will occupy a whole section of the library at a law school, if you're even doing it in the old paper form, looking at it in the paper form, which nobody does anymore anyway. But so the Supreme Court may issue a decision that says, listen, Congress, you make the laws so the bureaucracy, the executive branch can enforce them. You can't cede, you can't assign your ability under the Constitution to make laws to the executive branch. That's unconstitutional. So that's exactly what this act does, is that it gives the bureaucracy the ability to implement this thing on anti-Semitism. I would encourage you, I don't have time to go into it this morning, maybe Tom Hughes and I will talk about this tomorrow if we have time. Look at Peter's messages in Acts. So immediately all the people on the right are posting, the Jews killed Jesus, go ahead and arrest me. And what the response to that was, this sewer of anti-Jew hatred opened up in the comments and replies to these tweets. It's unbelievable. It is unbelievable, the hatred out there for Jews in Israel. Jews control everything. Well, this is what Martin Luther said. This is what Olivia and I talked about last week. This is a big problem. So this act has sort of opened that sewer again, and people are posting all of these things. There's a great article over at Tablet Magazine. I'll refer to you again. An editorial, not in our name. Politicians are using the rise in anti-Semitism as an excuse to curtail free speech and expand their own power. Jews must not let them. And I agree that I think the thing is unconstitutional. I think it's not very well written. But on the other hand, too, it doesn't help the cause when people run around and say, oh, they're going to throw us in jail for sharing the gospel. That's not what's there. Maybe the bureaucracy will put something like that in place, but it may be that that's unconstitutional anyway. So we just have to see how this plays out. And it's International Holocaust Remembrance Day. This is a tweet by a Palestinian. I want you to look at what he posted. He went to Auschwitz. And look at what he posted in his tweet. From these ghettos from which the Zionists came, Allah have mercy on all the Palestinians and our martyrs. And free Palestine. This is taken at Auschwitz. God willing, we will be free from you, and you will return to the concentration camp or to your countries, any other place, as long as you leave our place, Palestine. Because this is our land, and you belong here in Auschwitz. You left these camps, these ghettos. Long live Palestine, and long live Abu Obadiah. Now that's kind of an interesting ending to that, because go read the book of Obadiah. I believe the Obadiah in the Bible is a pronouncement of a coming judgment, a future judgment on Edom, the Palestinian people, for all that they've done. You could read about it. You read about it in Ezekiel chapter 35. These people who occupy the mountains of Israel, the green area there, and say, this is our land. This is the strategic high ground in Israel. That's green area is the West Bank. It's talked about in Ezekiel chapter 35, and I think in the book of Obadiah. And it's interesting that that guy puts that all together. Listen, folks, there is so much to talk about. I barely scratched the surface today. Pay attention. We have a lot of elections going on in the world. We have one in our country. They have one in the UK. I saw somebody posted a tweet of recent municipal elections in the UK of cities like Leeds, I believe, and some others, including London, which re-elected a Muslim as mayor of London for a third term. Leeds and a bunch of other cities, at least a dozen, have this week elected Muslims as mayor in England. The world is changing rapidly. You need to pay attention. Everything that the Bible talked about in terms of Israel being at the center of all this in the last days is not coming true. It is true. There are people tearing down our country and things that our country has, we thought, stood for. And I'm all for free speech, but free speech is not occupying and taking over buildings. That's called trespassing. But nobody's doing anything about that. Unless you're praying outside an abortion clinic, that will prosecute. It's a crazy world. So pay attention, and we'll be back next week. I'll do a midweek if I have time. I don't know if I have time to do it this week, but let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Lord, we're grateful that you have allowed us to live at such an incredibly significant time prophetically, geopolitically. Lord, we pray that you will give us wisdom to understand the times in which we live and to take that knowledge and to translate it into an urgency to share the gospel with those around us. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.